cat fingers. Wow, this episode. Spoiler alert for this episode and potentially future episodes. It depends on what I actually decide to talk about as I'm making this review. This episode is creepy and it's disturbing. Like, not through the entire thing. There are some really charming scenes in this episode, but for the most part, it's really freaky and weird. And I think is one of the episodes of this show that, when I first saw it, really said to me that this is not a show that's only aimed at children, that they do genuinely intend for this show to be appreciated by older audiences, because there's some really cool send-ups to body horror in this episode. This is also the second Greg episode, and I think does a really good job of redeeming his character because, well, we'll get to that in a minute as I'm going through the plot of the episode, but let's just say that he is much more likable here than he was in Laserlight Cannon. This episode opens up with Steven helping Greg out at the car wash where he works, cleaning Mayor Dewey's Dewey-mobile. This is the first time we meet Mayor Dewey. I actually forgot to mention it in the review of the previous episode, but the show does this a lot. It introduces us to characters very briefly. In fact, the previous episode, we see a bunch of characters running out of the Fryman's shop that we haven't even been introduced to yet by name, but all of their designs are consistent with their later appearances when we do meet them by name, which is a very cool touch. Anyway, Mayor Dewey is being Mayor Dewey. We don't really know that yet because we don't know the character yet, but looking back, his characterization is very consistent, which is always nice. And Steven and Greg get into a hose fight, and it's very adorable. And then all of a sudden, this white cat with a gemstone on its chest shows up and starts spraying them with the hose, and they don't know what it is. And then it turns into Amethyst, and this is the episode that introduces us to gem shapeshifting. And Greg immediately seems put off by this, which is also very consistent with his characterization in later episodes. We find out he had some really bad experiences with shapeshifting, particularly Amethyst shapeshifting. We never really learn what they were, but we do learn that he doesn't like shapeshifting, likely because of these experiences. So anyway, Steven is immediately interested in shapeshifting. I'm assuming he knew about shapeshifting prior to this, but hadn't really had an opportunity to talk to the gems about it until now. So he goes back to his house with Amethyst, and she's shapeshifting into a bunch of stuff, showing Steven what all she can do. And we do get a really cool cameo appearance here of Amethyst's combat form, the Purple Puma, which is yet another example of a character, kind of, it's still technically Amethyst, being introduced long before they are introduced by name, which I thought was a really cool touch. And it just goes to show how much in advance they plan out these episodes. Anyway, in this episode, Pearl and Amethyst are talking to Steven a little bit about shapeshifting because he wants to learn, and Pearl tells him not to bite off more than he can chew. Amethyst actually agrees with her, which, wow, that's something you don't see every day. And they decide to start small with shapeshifting into a cat. So Amethyst tells him to just shake it out. And so he does, and one of his fingers turns into a cat. And it's an actual autonomous living cat that just happens to be fused to the rest of his hand. And it's played for laughs, it's played for cute, but already you're kind of getting a hint that Steven's version of shapeshifting is not quite like the other gems. He doesn't actually disassemble his body into light and then reform it into something new. He actually biologically produces whatever new form he wants to assume. And that's creepy. And it gets creepier and creepier as he continues to make more and more cat fingers, showing them off to the townspeople, and then he can't turn them back. And you get the scene where the gems are going off onto a mission, and Pearl sees his cat fingers, realizes that Amethyst taught him how to shapeshift, but didn't tell him how to change back, blames her for it, and she says, that's fair, because she knows who she is, she knows where weaknesses are. Amethyst owns it, she's awesome. So anyway, Steven tries anyway to turn back into himself, using a similar methodology to the one that he used to actually transform his fingers in the first place, and he ends up producing cats from all over his body. They just start popping out of him at random, and this is when it gets really kind of body horror-y. He ends up going to Greg's car wash, and he's kind of just rolling along and writhing, and he's got these cats coming out of him, and he looks like a monster, and it's frankly kind of terrifying. And this is what I mean by Greg redeeming himself a bit in this episode, because he is very visibly put off by the whole concept of shapeshifting in general, but Steven's situation specifically, and yet he pushes that all to the side, and he does everything he can to help his son, showing how much he loves and cares for him. They figure out that cats don't like water, that if they spray enough water on these cat forms, they will recede back into him and disappear. So he goes through the car wash, comes out, everything is hunky-dory. He goes back to wait for the gems, and he's taken this all kind of in stride, and it hasn't really bothered him that much, which really, I would have been freaked the heck out after this if I were him, but I guess he did kind of grow up in an environment where crazy magical things happen, so he's probably used to it. I just realized this kid's probably going to have a huge psychology bill later on in life. So we get our moral of the episode, which is the joke moral, where Pearl says, "This just goes to show, never listen to Amethyst," and Amethyst again says, "That's fair," which is obviously a little tongue-in-cheek joke at the characterization, and fade to black. And this episode is good, but it's weird. And what it does, it's something that the show does really well, is it shows why Steven isn't ready to use one of these powers that could make him a lot stronger than he already is, pretty much instantly. They do this with his shape-shifting, they do this with his fusing, and they do this with his healing ability, and with his weapon for quite a long time. But his weapon doesn't take as long for him to figure out, as a way of limiting his powers and allowing his growth to happen in stages for us to follow along with. Because as I mentioned before, Steven is the viewpoint character. We are experiencing what happens in the series through him, so every time he learns to master one of his abilities, we feel that triumph along with him. And I just kind of realized this is actually a pretty good episode to be reviewing in this month, because this is the month of Halloween, and this episode is not only creepy, but it involves cats. But guys, what did you think about this episode? Did you find it as disturbing as I did? Did you find it more cute like Steven kind of did? Let me know in the comment section down below. Either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.